afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the HKEX ESG Academy webinar, Corporate Governance in Focus. This is Hillary from HKEX, and I will be your MC today. Robust corporate governance is a cornerstone of any well-run organization. The board sets the tone for establishing what good corporate culture and values look like, while staff are the ones responsible for embodying those principles and shaping what the company stands for. And here at HKEX, we think it is really important. As a frontline regulator, we are here to support and guide listed companies in achieving greater business resiliency, sustainability, and long-term financial success. With the implementation of our updated corporate governance code earlier this year, we would like to take the opportunity to explore some practical ways in which companies can achieve and maintain the highest standard of corporate governance through today's webinar. So to kick off today's program, I would like to invite Ms. 𝗙𝗲𝗲, Head of Listing at HKEX, to deliver the welcome remarks. Bonnie, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today. I'm very pleased to welcome our honorable guest, Mr. 𝗙𝗴𝗲, Director of Corruption Prevention of the ICAC, and Dr. 𝗙𝗴𝗲, Executive Director of the Equal Opportunities Commission. Today's webinar centers around three themes: culture, integrity, and diversity. And we've brought together renowned speakers and market practitioners to share their insights on how these three qualities contribute to effective corporate governance, which is vital for healthy, vibrant, and resilient markets. HKEX is a preferred capital raising venue of choice. To maintain and strengthen this position, we are committed to enhancing the vibrancy and diversity of our markets. And that means we focus on the long-term and sustainable development of those markets and their stakeholders. As an exchange operator, market regulator, and a public company, we see ourselves as a change agent. We promote high standards of responsible corporate governance by advocating for and introducing strong corporate governance and ESG disclosures. Now, first, let us focus on culture and integrity. And let's do so by asking this question: what do culture and integrity have to do with corporate governance? Well, culture and integrity are key to driving change within business organizations. Certainly, policymakers and regulators are in a strong position to drive change too. But when change comes from the top within a business, it is all the more powerful. Change that comes from within an organization earns greater trust in the motivations and integrity of the business. One of the focuses of our latest corporate governance requirements is instilling change in the mindsets of listed companies' boards. Our new requirement highlights the board's role in defining the company's purpose, value, and strategy, and developing the right culture to support the pursuit of success. Anti-corruption and whistleblowing are core to establishing a healthy corporate culture. We're very fortunate to have Joe with us today to share his experience on how to build an ethical business culture to advance corporate governance. Now let's turn to diversity. I think we all agree that diversity is important socially. But at HKEX, we also view it as important from a governance and a performance perspective. A listed company board needs to have the right mix of individuals with talent, experience, and objectivity. A diverse board strengthens a company's ability to manage challenges within the company and the industry. As a regulator, we have been promoting corporate governance and diversity among our more than 2,500 listed companies. Our latest corporate governance requirements focus on promoting board refreshment, as well as diversity within the boardroom and across the whole organization. Since 2019, all issuers are required to have a board diversity policy. It is encouraging to see that the percentage of issuers with at least one female director on their boards has increased by 5% to 72% since the implementation of that requirement. We took an even greater step forward last year by calling an end to single-gender boards by 2024. So now, companies looking to list in Hong Kong must have at least one female director on board. An existing listed issuer will have a 3-year transition period to appoint at least one female director to their board. Besides rules and regulations, we are also helping companies take the next step in their diversity journey. For example, we launched a new repository on board diversity and inclusion in focus in April. This aims to improve transparency around board diversity, enabling investors and our stakeholders to stay informed of business policies and approaches to good governance and diversity. At the same time, we are aware that diversity is not confined to the boardroom. On the workforce level, issuers need to disclose and explain the workforce gender ratio and their plans or measurable objectives for achieving gender diversity within their companies. These are good examples of how regulators can promote good corporate governance. But as a company, HKEX also needs to walk the walk. We have therefore pledged to embed diversity in our organization. For example, we have a robust governance framework for diversity, such as the board diversity policy and equal opportunities and anti-discrimination or harassment policy. Last year, we launched the Diversity Networks, which is an employee resources group to foster a diverse and inclusive workplace. In this regard, we are very happy to have Varick with us today to share advice on how companies can promote diversity and equal opportunity. Now, I want to spend a minute on the role of which directors play in all this. Whether the change is coming from a regulator or is being driven from within, company directors have critical roles to play in putting in place a comprehensive and effective internal control and risk management framework. A solid governance framework and a culture of compliance will help directors meet the demands of a growing range of stakeholders' interests and constantly evolving macro environment. Such a framework and culture will help ensure companies meet their E, S, and G responsibilities while also delivering returns to shareholders. In a moment, John Witz, our head of enforcement, will share with us some practical examples and steps that directors should take in discharging their responsibilities. I think practical examples are very important. We're therefore determined to share real, actionable insights that come from practical experience. In this regard, we're delighted to also welcome today 𝗙𝗴𝗲, Legal and Governance Director of MTR Corporation Limited, May Tan, former CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, Hong Kong, and an independent director of Manulife and CLNP, Christopher Toll, Chairman of the Hong Kong Institute of Directors, and Douglas Wu, Chairman of Wheelock and Company Limited. They will share with us the insights and experience on what board or directors can do to promote diversity and the right culture for excellent corporate governance. I hope that this afternoon's discussion will provide you with some valuable insights into your own corporate governance journey. Without further ado, I shall pass the floor to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Zhou Li, Director of Corruption Prevention of ICAC, to the stage. Mr. Li will discuss integrity, business ethics, and policy setting, and how they relate to good corporate governance. Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I wish to thank the HKEX for this opportunity to share with you the ICC's messages about anti-corruption and ethical business culture. Now, today, I'll share with you the key elements of a good anti-corruption policy and systems, whistleblowing policies, and some advice on how to foster an ethical business culture, and also introduce the service of the ICC, our Corruption Prevention Advisory Service. Now, first of all, something for you to be proud of about Hong Kong. Hong Kong has been continuously ranked among the top in international ratings about its clean government and clean business environment. For example, last year, Hong Kong was ranked 12th among 180 countries or regions among the world in the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. Now, this clean government and business environment has brought huge benefits to business in Hong Kong. But with the benefits would also come responsibility. All companies, especially public listed companies, all have a role to contribute to help maintain this status, but adhering to anti-corruption business practices and culture, both locally and overseas. Now, we are very pleased that HKEX has included requirements for anti-corruption and whistleblowing in their 𝗔𝗴𝗲 guide and the ESG reporting guide. I won't repeat the requirements here because I think you would all know about it, but I would just like to mention that good governance is the most important of all because it ensures that all other objectives are achieved. Now, under governance, anti-corruption, or better still, the prevention of corruption, is one of the most important components because corruption can cause all other objectives to fail. For example, the green purchasing under your environment objective, quality of your products, safety of the buildings and bridges you build, your charity donations under social objective, your profitability, all can be made to fail or undermined by corruption. Now, the 𝗔𝗴𝗲 guide of the HKEX provides a very good framework and the principles for anti-corruption systems. There are also international standards on anti-corruption that you might wish to refer to. And the ICC has also produced publications tailored for the local law and environment that will supplement the 𝗔𝗴𝗲 guide. I'll just highlight a few key elements today. First of all, the company needs to clearly set out the company's policy and restrictions on acceptance and offering of advantages, and other integrity requirements, in particular, the avoidance and handling of conflict of interest. Now, apart from laying down a code of conduct, training for all staff, and regular communications on the anti-bribery law, the company's own anti-corruption policies in integrity requirements, the corruption pitfalls in day-to-day business operations, and the consequences of breaches, such training are very important. And for managers and supervisors and directors, we also strongly recommend that you provide them with higher level training that will cover corruption risks in their respective business areas, the preventive measures that they can apply to prevent corruption, so that they will all understand the risks in their business areas and the measures and help the company to prevent corruption. A robust risk management and internal control system is also a key component of the system. This would comprise risk management, corruption risk assessment, and controls in the day-to-day business processes, plus internal audit function, compliance functions, and for some industries, they may also want to have corruption and fraud prevention units. And to deal with possible breaches, there will also need to be a whistleblowing policy and disciplinary system. Now here I will explain why a clear policy and communication is very important. Because private sector corruption in Hong Kong is prohibited under Section 9 of the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance, we call it POBO, and it has two special features. First, it is an offense for any employee or agent to accept or solicit advantages in return for any act in relation to the principal's business. And any act is very broad. It doesn't have to be something which involves abuse of the office or causing harm to the company. Any act could fall into this definition of corruption. And because it's so broad, so there is an allowance for the company or the employer to give permission to allow certain advantages, such as a tip, or some companies might allow the staff to receive red packets during Chinese New Year. So the second feature is that there is no bribery offense if the acceptance of the advantage is permitted by the principal. And this is what we call the principal permission. Therefore, it's not enough to simply state that staff should comply with the POBO. Now, there have been cases, bribery cases in the past, that was acquitted simply because the company's policy was unclear, or the manager did not display a clear understanding of the company policy. Also, people might offer expensive gifts to your staff without especially requesting some favor, just to sweeten your staff. And that could end up with some favor in the end. And it's not always easy to prove the favor in return. That's why companies must have a clear policy on the permissions and prohibitions on relating to acceptance and solicitation of advantages. Now, another stringent provision in the POBO is Section 8, which prohibits the offering of advantages to public officials, public servants. And that doesn't need to be a request for favor in return. Now, because of these stringent requirements and special features in the POBO, companies must have a clear policy, including a policy on guidelines on offering of advantages. Now, in broad terms, conflict of interest is also a form of corruption, such as awarding contracts to suppliers run by the staff's own relatives. Now, having a conflict of interest is not an offense under POBO, but very often, the staff or even director may perform some fraudulent act to cover up their abuse, such as making a false declaration of there being no conflict of interest, or falsifying some quotations. Hence, requirement guidelines and mechanism for declaring and handling conflict of interest is also necessary. I won't go into detail about risk management and controls today because the area is very, very big. But just want to say that superficial measures are not enough. For example, many managers think that, they are well protected because the company requires free quotations for procurement, or the higher value procurement require higher authority or the board approval. But the common tricks are that the corrupt staff could collude with supplier to falsify the two quotations, and he can also split up a bigger purchase into smaller purchases. There are so many different ways in corrupt practices. So superficial measures are not enough. You need to know your corruption-prone processes and MOs, conduct regular risk assessment, and put in place specific preventive measures. If there's any corrupt personnel in a company, they will know the loopholes. They will be smart, and so you need expert knowledge to deal with corruption risks. And one of the most important effective detections of corruption is whistleblowing by insiders. They know what's going on, they see what's going on, and their reports are usually more reliable than outsiders. Now, our annual survey found out that found the reasons why some people might not be willing to report corruption. So these include fear of the safety, wondering whether they have enough evidence, wonder if worry about that the procedure will be complicated, whether this will lead to any results, etc. So some staff may know about the corrupt practice for years, but they don't speak up. So companies need to have a good whistleblowing policy that can address all these worries and encourage staff to report corruption. Now, the elements of a good whistleblowing policy is already in the CG guide. I just want to highlight the last point. Basically, we advise everyone to report corruption to the 𝗙cie ASAP, directly, and in confidence. Now, but if the information you receive is too vague or unclear, I won't say that you cannot do any initial inquiry just to find out, to avoid, to rule out trivial misunderstandings. But if you do that, such inquiries must be handled with great care, in strict confidence, discreetly, and must be preliminary only. Don't go around telling people, discussing people who don't need to know about the case, including people who are close to the subject of the complaint, because who knows, he might have accomplices in the company. And don't try to conduct detailed investigations yourself, because that might alert the culprit and would jeopardize future investigation by the 𝗙cie. Now, if there's any reasonable suspicion that corruption has occurred, you need to report to the 𝗙cie at once. And my view is that ethical business cultures actually has a bearing on the integrity of the staff. So here are some of my advice. Now, you need to set the right tone at the top. Include integrity and honesty in your core values. Don't bribe, which is obvious, and don't bribe both locally and outside Hong Kong. And you should effectively and seriously promulgate your code, emphasizing its importance, implement it faithfully. Extend your integrity requirements to your business partners, and do your business in an ethical manner. And also make the tone clear through regular communication and by practice. And about ethical business culture, my view and observation is that whether the company adopts ethical business practices has a bearing on the integrity culture of the staff. If you do your business ethically, you inspire your staff to behave ethically and attract ethical staff. But on the other way around, if you don't, this will be used by your staff to rationalize, justify their unethical behavior towards the company. So here are my advice. Adopt ethical practices, honesty, integrity towards your stakeholders, customers, investors, the public. Adopt ethical practices, fairness, integrity in your internal processes such as procurement and hiring. Comply with regulations and laws. Don't always try to circumvent regulations to your advantage whenever you can. Well, the reason is that if you practice all these unethical behavior, circumvention, your staff would learn from the leader, and then they would be tempted to do the same to the company. Now, other management practices, you try to address the integrity issues in all management practices. And one thing I wish to mention today as example is the staff compensation and recruitment, because in recent years, we are seeing more cases relating to this area. One type is the staff commission-based remuneration schemes. Now, while we understand that companies in some industry would like to have attractive sales commission schemes to drive performance, but from my point of view, some of these schemes are too complicated and poorly designed. They are creating unhealthy incentives, pressure for the staff, which I think would actually amounts to temptation rather than incentive. And these schemes are very conducive to manipulation and fraud. On one hand, a staff may not be able to earn enough income to support his family. On the other, he might earn a big bonus to buy a luxury car. So the disparity is so huge that the temptation will be there. And another area related to this, the staff, is the exploitation of grassroots workers. We are seeing some cases of grassroots workers having to share a portion of their wages with someone in order to secure a job. So I would suggest companies look at the staff compensation schemes, adopt fairer and healthier remuneration schemes, which will provide healthy incentives to encourage performance with reasonable income security, which would not tend to promote greed, and also put in place reasonable controls to prevent fraud. And finally, the adoption of CSR practices would also help to foster ethical business culture in the company, of course. Needless to say, regular training on integrity and ethics would be necessary, and supplemented by some campaigns, newsletters from the top would be good. And don't overlook the need to communicate anti-corruption policies to your business partners, including customers. Sometimes people might make mistakes, and there needs to be consequences. They will need to be held accountable. The company should have a mechanism to review and reflect on integrity-related incidents, so that this will help the formulation of guidelines and training. And finally, there needs to be consequence for breaches, including disciplinary actions and reporting to the law enforcement agencies. Our service does not end with this webinar. We have a corruption prevention advisory service that will receive requests from all private companies, and we can provide corruption risk assessment, advice on corruption prevention measures, training for managers, etc. That would supplement the CG guide. So you are welcome to call us anytime. You can also go to our website and find a library of corruption prevention resources, including guides for certain industries and business functions, and subscribe to our e-messages on case studies, alerts on latest corrupt practices and trends, tips on corruption prevention, etc. We have this CPS portal. You can type in your, go to our website, or just use a search engine to search our website. And I hope today's sharing will be useful to you. We are always here to receive any requests if you need, and then give you more advice on corruption prevention and training. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Next, I would like to invite to the stage Dr. 𝗙𝗹𝗲, Executive Director of Operations of the Equal Opportunities Commission. Dr. 𝗙 will share with us his thoughts on workplace diversity. Dr. 𝗙, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about how to build a positive culture with equal opportunities. Well, I think my task is rather simple. I just want to share two things with you. The first thing is why we need equal opportunity or diversity in our corporate or in our company. The second thing is how to implement it. I address the first question first, is why. I think you all know that Hong Kong is a very, service-oriented economy. And the most important asset in all company is our human resource. So when your employee feel that they are you respect their culture, their diversity, their background, or even their differences, they will be more committed to your company. So that's why it will keep your talent, retain your talent, and helps to attract talent as well. The second thing is that if you have a very diverse workforce, because they are coming from different backgrounds, because of their diverse background, they know the need of the people from their own background. So you have insight, you have more information about the need of the market. So it helps you to, improve your business. And the third thing that is, in fact, is important to us, to the EOC, the Equal Opportunities Commission, is that if this company, they do their first step, they have their own policy, they implement diversity, they will serve as a role model for other smaller companies to follow. In Hong Kong, most of the companies are SME. They are not big corporate, right? So role model is important for Hong Kong. And the last thing is about your own interests, about compliance, about legal risks that you may face. In the following slide, I'm going to share with you the current landscape of Hong Kong. I mean, the kind of complaint that we receive, the kind of challenge that corporate or we are facing, because it will be important to you. At the moment, we just have 4 pieces of anti-discrimination ordinance in Hong Kong, namely the Sex Discrimination Ordinance, SDO, the Disability Discrimination Ordinance, DDO, the Family Status, FSDO, and the Race, RDO. In the bullet points, I don't mention it one by one. They are what we call the prohibited or protected attributes or characteristics, namely sex, pregnancy, family, marital status, disability, race, as well as family status. Some people may not understand what exactly is family status. I think I need to give a bit of explanation here. In fact, the name should be family responsibility discrimination. The definition is like that. If someone, because they have an immediate family member that you need to take care of, you have that responsibility. And if someone, pick on your responsibility and treat you less favorably because of that, that is what we call family status discrimination. So these are the areas currently the anti-discrimination law that covers. And about the recent or latest amendment in these laws, well, in fact, last year and 2 years ago, we have amendment to the SDO, the DDO, as well as the RDO. And I briefly mentioned about the latest amendment because it's important to you. Your HR department may be aware of the pre-existing requirement under the 4 pieces of legislation, but the latest amendment they may not be aware of, so they need to know about the changes. First thing is about breastfeeding harassment. It is introduced in 2021. Another thing is about the coverage of harassment under the SDO, the DDO, as well as the RDO. In the past, the law only cover, or protect customer being harassed by the service provider. But because of the amendment, now the protection is both ways. Both the client and the service provider will be protected. So the coverage is now both ways. The third amendment is about certain, very specific situation. In the past, only those employees work under the same employer, their interaction are being protected. But because of the latest change, those who are employed by different employer, but because they are working in the same common workplace, they will be protected as well. So because of this latest change, I think your HR department or even your company policy need to adapt to these changes. And the common form of discrimination, in fact, is three kinds. First is direct discrimination. It's rather simple. If you, because of the person's protected characteristic, you treat him or her less favorably, it's called direct discrimination. It's simple and easy to understand. The concept of indirect discrimination is rather complicated. There are 4 elements in it. The first is you apply the same requirement or condition to everybody, for example, to your employees. It seems rather equal because you are applying the same requirement or condition. But the fact is, because of their certain background, their characteristic, the smaller proportion of them can comply with that requirement, and they suffer detriment as a result. And if your requirement or condition is not justifiable, is not backed up by good reason, then it is indirect discrimination. A simple example, if your company have a e-platform to serve your client, they need to have vision so that they can negotiate the website, so that they can fill in certain forms or things on your internet. But for people with visual impairment, they cannot navigate your website. Then they will not be able to use your platform to obtain the service. It is a form of indirect discrimination. And victimization, well, in fact, it's simple. If someone, lodge a complaint, they serve as a witness, or they allege something that is, unlawful under the law, and you, because of their action, you treat them less favorably, then it is victimization. It adds protection to those who want to, exercise their right under the law. Now, let's focus more about what are the problem areas in the employment sector. Under our 4 pieces of legislation, we receive complaints mostly from DDO, in relation to DDO and SDO. You see the bar chart is higher in these 2 ordinances. And if we zoom in or focus more, like, for example, in SDO, what are the major area or problem area in our complaint? You can see almost 40 to 60% each year is relating to sexual harassment. So it seems like a big problem, right? In fact, it's not just big. I think it's huge. Later, I will show you, in fact, it's just a tip of the iceberg. And when we look at all the complaints, you will see that most of these complaints, vast majority, are relating to the employment sector. So all these complaints are related to company, to employer, to you as an employer. Now, talking about the tip of the iceberg, in a large-scale survey that we conducted last year, the sample size is really huge, big, 5,000 respondents. And among these respondents, 11.8%, encounter sexual harassment in their employment in the past 24 months. So 1 in 8 has already encountered harassment in their employment life. So it's a lot. If your company size is 100, probably 12 people has already encountered sexual harassment. Okay? And about the gender of those who harasser, mainly they are male, but don't forget, some of them are also female or mixed. Okay? And let's see whether company or employer has their own in-house policy to deal with this kind of problem. Among our sample, only 1/3 of them has their own in-house policy. For bigger company, 500 or more, the rate is higher, is 62%, but still, about 1/3 still don't have their own in-house policy. That is, disadvantage to the company, because later I will explain about the responsibility of the employer. Next, I will talk about the kind of industry that is more hardly hit by this kind of sexual harassment complaint. The one I circled in red, the 4 areas are have the highest percentage of sexual harassment cases. And why I say it's just a tip of the iceberg, because among the sample who has been sexually harassed in the past 24 months, only 1 in 7 will report the case either to the EOC or to their own company. So every complaint that you receive, there are 6 cases that are not reported to you. So it's really, really, really underrepresented in terms of the complaints numbers. About the witnesses, most of the case has been witnessed by someone, 41%. But whether they will step in to stop or intervene the harassment process, only 11.5% will, as bystander, they will do something. So in fact, this role is very important. If you can mobilize the bystander, if they intervene the occurrence of this kind of unhealthy or unethical behavior, it will help your company to prevent something. Now, the most important point is about vicarious liability. A company will not sexually harass someone. It's only the individual, your employee, will harass someone, right? Under the law, if someone engaged in sexual harassment, the person, of course, is personally liable. But the thing is, the law really is very clever. It's clearly stated that if some of your employee engage in such kind of conduct, the employer, I mean the company, the corporate, is equally liable to the same act. So you can be a defendant as well, I mean the company. So another thing is, even someone who is not your employee, say for example, you hire a contractor or someone who is not your employee to do something, you are a principal. The act of your agent, for the act of the agent, you also will be vicariously liable. So you have to do something to mitigate your legal risk, right? The only defense available under the law is that you have taken some, what we call reasonably practicable steps to prevent. But in the law, they don't explain in detail what constitute or amount to reasonably practicable steps. But the ordinances empower the commission to write something, what we call the code of practice. The code of practice, we will explain in detail how we interpret the law. And in the code of practice, we have written something about how we see is the most practical steps to prevent that. So I will later talk about the steps in detail. At the policy level, we recommend Hong Kong Exchange to add, sexual harassment policy as one of the ESG requirement reporting in the reporting guide. Because if, as I mentioned, Hong Kong added to the ESG guide, more and more companies will introduce their own in-house policy. It will help them to mitigate their legal risk as well as incentivize other smaller companies to follow. And about the company themselves, how they implement what we call the reasonably practical steps. Well, under our core practice, we mentioned this in detail. First, they have to have their own in-house policy. They have to set up their complaint handling mechanism. Whenever there's complaint, they have to take it seriously. When they find that something is substantiated, they have to take appropriate action. And from time to time, they have to review their own policy so that they can improve it. And last but not least, they have to conduct some sort of training to all their staff to raise their awareness. If company has taken all these steps, then they can really mitigate their legal risk. Another thing that we suggest for corporate is that you must take a top-down approach. Some senior level staff or management staff has to be appointed to take care of this kind of policy so that they can see all the implementation, see it through. And then don't forget about your junior staff. From all the staff or even your intern, your volunteer, you have to inform them, raise their awareness about their own rights, obligation as well. And for companies that are client-facing, working in the client-facing industry, they have to raise their awareness about, because of the recent amendment, the client, their action will also be covered by the law. You have to inform your client that if you sexually harass our staff, you will be responsible. And you also have to inform your staff if someone harassed you during your service provision, you are protected. You can lodge a complaint to me so that I can handle it. So this kind of additional protection, I mean the recent law changes, you have to inform the parties involved. And in 𝗙𝗴𝗲, apart from issuing the code of practice, which is a paralegal document that you should follow, we have also developed something or guideline that we call the good management practice. Later on, I will show you the website where you can download all this good management practice series. One of the key, factor that we mention from time to time is what we call consistent selection criteria. Whenever you do recruitment, you make promotion decision or even dismissal decision, you better, think of a very consistent selection criteria that is free of direct or indirect discrimination. You have to fix that criteria first. And then you do it according to this criteria, then you're safe. And another thing is, you have to, because I mentioned too much about sexual harassment. In fact, there's a lot of area that you should, consider so that you can, engage a very diverse workforce. For example, flexible hours, work-life balance, it will cater for the need of those with family responsibility, right? You have to think about it. And then for those return from work, return to work from pregnancy, it's very important. For big company, it's not a problem, but for SME, in fact, all the pregnancy discrimination campaign that we receive mainly are those who return from the maternity leave. On the first day that they return, they receive a letter saying that you are dismissed. Believe it or not, it happens, and it happens a lot. And accessibility of your workplace is very important because some of your employee may be, disabled. They have to, travel with a wheelchair. For example, people who are hearing impaired, visually impaired, the safety installation, you may need to change as well. So this is responding to the need under the DDO. And also, multi-purpose room, you may need to consider because of the latest amendment. Breastfeeding is now one of the protected characteristics, and you have to accommodate the need of the breastfeeding mothers. So you also need to consider installation of this kind of facilities. Okay, about the good management practice series, you can download it from our website. I'll show you the website later. And we encourage, company to have their own EO policy, develop their own in-house policy, in particular, the anti-sexual harassment policy. And another thing is about grievance procedure. As I mentioned, you must have an in-house complaint handling procedure. Otherwise, your staff have no channel to go to. So all they can go to is EOC or go to the newspaper, right? That will damage the image of your company. That is not helpful at all. Let me introduce a charter that we introduced or launched 3 years ago. The EOC launched a racial diversity and inclusion charter back in 2018 in the December. And nowadays, we have 220 signatories. If you are not one of them, I urge you to join this charter because in the charter we have some guidelines for you to follow, and we have some good practice to share with you. From time to time, we organize activities or seminar so that the signatory can share their good practice, their success story. So in fact, it's a very good platform for you to share. So about the eligibility criteria is rather simple. If you have a business registration for over 1 year, you can join. That's the basic requirement. So this is the next slide. Show the company that join the charter. Well, it's quite a lot now. And about the resource that I talk about, here are the links to our core practices as well as our good management practice series. And if you click this link, you can gain a lot of information about how to implement equal opportunities as well as diversity policy in your own company. Last but not least is one of the important areas that I talk about. EOC established an anti-sexual harassment unit 2 years ago. They now run a hotline. If you have something that you don't know, you want to know more in relation to the law, how it implement, you can just pick up the phone and ring our hotline. Our officer will answer all these questions. We also have a dedicated website so that you can download some, sample policy if you don't have one, so that you can just tailor your own policy based on that framework. So these are the things that I want to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhu. Now, we will have Mr. John Witz, Head of Enforcement, Listing Division at HKEX, to share his views on the lessons learned from enforcement action.
Hello, and thank you to you all. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today about corporate governance and how enforcement action is intended to help all stakeholders on their corporate governance journey and to make sure that we keep a very high level of market quality here in Hong Kong. Modern corporate governance turns 30 this year. What I mean by that is that this year, of course, marks the 30th anniversary since 𝗙cie𝗹𝗹彼published his very famous report into corporate governance. 1992 also saw the publication of the Treadway Commission's report on internal controls, the integrated framework, which gives a lot of guidance about internal controls. These two reports, I think it is fair to say, laid the foundation for a reset on how everyone viewed corporate governance worldwide. And looking back, I think it's also fair to say that they really stood the test of time. I'm going to be coming back to both of those two reports at stages during this presentation. But the focus in this session is on enforcement. So I'd like to begin, first of all, by talking about why we enforce, why take action of enforcement nature in the first place, and how enforcement is so much more than just a process to bring about a consequence for wrongdoers. The main point that I'd ask you to keep in mind through all of this is that enforcement is a learning tool. If you look at our enforcement objectives, you'll see that they talk about educating the market, influencing compliance culture, enhancing corporate governance, all these positive traits about learning. Of course, in any system of rules, there needs to be a consequence or a risk of a consequence for people who break those rules. And deterrence is, of course, a very important part of what we do. But for me, the greater value comes from this ability to help people to learn when something has gone wrong so that no one else makes the same mistake again. To illustrate that, contrast two different approaches. Let's say someone has broken the rules. It goes to enforcement action, we complete the case, we issue a sanction, and then we come back to you and say, don't worry, we've sorted it. They've been punished. That's one approach. Alternatively, we can come back to you and say, this is what happened. Maybe there were some misunderstandings by the people involved. Maybe there was some uncertainty about what precisely the rules meant. Maybe the directors thought they were doing a very good job, but they hadn't really quite got to grips with what responsibilities they had. We'll tell you what we've seen there so that no one else, hopefully, will make the same mistake again because they can learn from that. The first approach doesn't teach you anything. The second one, hopefully, in every case, there's a lesson to be learned. And we have this very much in mind in everything that we do. So it's not just our enforcement cases. We also publish a regular newsletter called the Enforcement Bulletin. We publish guidance. Everything in there is a lesson to learn. So against that backdrop, I'm going to talk to you about some of the areas that we focus on within enforcement. And I'm going to start by talking about our or some of our enforcement priorities. So last year we published our current enforcement priorities, and the 3 of them are up on the slide there. For today, though, I'm going to focus really just on the top 2. I'm going to talk about responsibility, I'm going to talk about controls, and about culture. So first off, responsibility. One of the key concerns identified in the Cadbury report was really a problem of finger pointing. This is particularly between the companies and their external auditors, and particularly in relation to financial reporting. Everyone said someone else was in charge, it's someone else's fault. And the Cadbury report recommended there be a specific statement made by the board saying, we are responsible. That's to make it clear to everyone, but also to the directors themselves so that they understand what they've taken on. And when it comes to the listing rules, it's very much the same thing for corporate governance as a whole. It lies first and foremost with the board. And every member of the board, individually and collectively, is responsible for making sure that the company is run in an appropriate way and to make sure that there's compliance with the rules. Now, there are many facets to the concept of directors' responsibility, and indeed many countries or jurisdictions around the world have wrestled in how you can even codify, if at all, the list of all the directors' duties. But I've put on this slide 3 points which I think help to encapsulate, really at a high level, what we look for in our enforcement work. The first one there is about engagement, being engaged. Are all the directors really engaged and active? And wanting the company to do well is only part of this. And likewise, focusing on only one aspect of operations or one part of the business will often be too narrow. We really need directors to be immersed and to have a deep understanding of the company. In our enforcement work, we sometimes encounter directors who have played only a very limited role, or they've only devoted a very limited amount of time to the company. We've sometimes seen directors who think that being appointed as a director is effectively an honorary position. It's like it's a title which they can use for marketing or for relationship purposes. Now that's a misunderstanding. It's really a failure to grasp the weight of responsibility that comes from being appointed as a director. And that mismatch can all too easily lead to problems, both for the company and, of course, from our side, in respect of rule compliance. Directors really have to understand that they need to be hands-on, they need to be stuck in. It's a very active role, and it's a big commitment. It takes up a lot of time. The second point I've gotten there is about asking questions. So let's assume that we have got a good board, everyone's paying attention, and everyone's very active. But that's got to go beyond active listening. Directors have to use their individual judgment and share their wisdom with the board. Everything that they see, they need to think, well, is that right? And ask the right questions. And that's particularly important for the independent directors. I mean, their perspective, they are there to give that outside perspective, and it's worthless if they don't voice it. And when they voice it, they also need to follow through with it. So the board collectively is not going to operate well if it slips into groupthink, if documents are signed blindly because someone else has signed it and so you feel that you don't need to check it, or if a proposition is put forward and it's unquestionably followed just because we've all worked well together, so I'm sure that makes sense. The board is there to ask questions of one another, to help to tease out the right approach. And unfortunately, in some of our cases, we see directors who really don't take any discernible interest in the business that's going through. It could be a very large transaction, a lot of money that has gone out of the company, a significant change that is spotted in the management accounts or in the regular financial reporting. Questions need to be asked about those. A director doesn't need to be an expert in every single area, but they do need the ability, they need to be ready and willing to say, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me. Please can someone explain? And with that, we're going well down the right path. Similarly, directors can't be content if they're not given the information that they know they should be getting. I mentioned, for example, regular accounts and financial reporting. If you're not receiving that, then it's not okay to say, I haven't seen anything that looks problematic. You have to realize you're not receiving what you need. Again, we've seen in our cases instances, for example, where directors know that they've been unable to attend a board meeting and they've never received a copy of the minutes from that meeting. They've not spoken to their fellow directors to find out what happened. That's not okay. That's too passive. And there's an obvious gap there. The director knows there's a gap there and needs to follow up to make sure that that information comes through. Similarly, if something's been delegated, delegation's essential. But once it has been delegated, is there an active step to follow up and say, how's that going? Is everything going okay there? And to get the information that is needed to be able to make sure that that delegation is working effectively. The next thing I wanted to talk about was controls. I'm going to go back again to the 𝗙𝗵𝗲 report, which said an effective internal control system is an essential part of the efficient management of a company. And the critical word there is essential. Establishing an internal control and risk management framework, making sure it's effective, keeping it maintained, these are such important parts of the board's responsibility. And the structures for that framework, I mean, I can't possibly describe them all today, but typically they range from having the overarching policies through operating procedures down to specific implementation processes and practices. The framework needs to cover a very broad range of matters, from HR issues to monitoring the business, from financial reporting to rule compliance. I mentioned the Treadway Commission's report on internal controls. That provides a lot of guidance on the sorts of areas that this framework needs to cover. And our most recent enforcement bulletin also goes into that in quite a lot of detail, and I'd recommend looking at that if you want to know more about this area. Similarly, if you look at our disciplinary sanctions in our cases, you'll see the topic of internal controls comes up time and time again. It's a very important focus for us. All companies take risks. That's business. That's fine. But this effective framework has got to be in place and maintained to ensure that the investors' interests are protected and to ensure that all the rules are followed. So when we take our cases, we don't just ask what's happened. We also ask, what framework have you got in place? Because things do go wrong, but if the framework is there and it's robust, you've got a lot better chance of dealing with those issues in the right way or stopping them from happening in the first place. A final word here just on audit. That was also, again, a big subject in the 𝗙𝗵𝗲 report. And I think it's worth keeping in mind the particular role that's played here by the audit committee, the independent directors, and how they interact with the external auditors. And understanding the limits to what that external audit can do. This ties in a little bit with what I was saying about being too passive or just not reacting when there isn't enough information coming through. The auditors are typically not doing a review of the internal control framework when they're doing their regular annual audit. So it's definitely not enough for directors to say, well, look, the auditors have signed off the accounts again. They haven't flagged anything. There's nothing for me to worry about. There's nothing for me to check here. Again, that's the wrong way to look at it because it's a different area of responsibility and that can lead to trouble. On record keeping, I'll just say a quick word, which is that it's really important to keep very good records of everything that's happened. This is the audit trail. And I'll say this is true for at both the company level and for the individual directors. What do I mean by that? When we're conducting our investigations, we will ask for the evidence of the steps that took place around the events that we're looking at and around the framework. And the records really should be there. The listed issuer should be keeping good records. And an individual director should also be keeping good records. If they're emailing in their questions and their comments, they're providing their critical thinking, their independent judgment, keep those records so that you can show to us that you have done a good job. Because in the absence of these records, it does call into question whether or not the proper steps were taking place, and indeed whether the company is also being run in a good way. And that leads me on to culture. This is the hardest one to pin down. If someone's looking for a checklist, of course, we all know that you're not going to find one. Or if someone says, well, what standard for culture do I need to avoid enforcement action? Again, it's not something that I can describe. But that somewhat misses the point. Let's go back to the 𝗙𝗵𝗲 report. Raising standards of corporate governance cannot be achieved by structures and rules alone. They are important because they provide a framework which will encourage and support good governance, but what counts is the way in which they are put to use. And it's that last part that I think really encapsulates this idea of culture. And what we're looking for is something that is instilled throughout an issuer's group. It starts from the top, but it needs to extend all the way through the management and staff, all the way down through the subsidiaries, inside Hong Kong, outside Hong Kong, around the whole business. This is what Professor 𝗙ecie was talking about when he gave what is quite a well-known talk on corporate governance in the World Economic Forum and culture, where he referred to something as the smell of the place. We have this instinctive reaction when we know something doesn't feel right, when we haven't got the whole story or something's not going the way it should be. And that's the smell of it. And I'll mention just say a couple of areas around this in terms of culture. Tone from the top. That's important because it's an essential given. If the board aren't leading by example and saying we want to have the right culture, we want to be compliant, then it's not going to trickle down through the rest of the group. But having that statement is not enough. It only goes so far. As I said at the outset on this section, it's got to pervade through the entire group, wherever they are around the world. Everyone's got to understand and feel that this is the way the company wants to go. The second point is this idea about having the freedom to speak up. You've got to have a culture where people have the safety and confidence to be able to articulate concerns when they see something that they think doesn't look right or they think they've got a question to ask. Now, from an enforcement perspective, you're not likely to see us bringing a case where we say this company has failed to have the right culture. That's not really what we're looking for. But what I can tell you is that when we're doing our investigations, we do very quickly get a feel for that. We have a sense for that smell of the place. We are looking for that attitude. And when we feel that it's wrong, we will spend more time drilling down into the detail to try and get a sense of whether everything is in order. Because if the culture is wrong, if that feel is wrong, there's a good chance that the directors haven't really got to grips with their responsibilities, or there's a good chance that that framework that I've been talking about isn't there either. They often go hand in hand. So one is a sensor for the other. So to round up, please think of enforcement as a learning opportunity. As I say, in everything that we do, all that we publish, we're trying to provide guidance to you to help you on your corporate governance journey. I've put on the slides there some of the things that you can find on our website. I very much encourage people to spend time exploring that and seeing what they can learn. There's so much information there. All the cases and materials that we work on, all the sanctions that we publish. I'd also encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up to receive timely alerts when we put new information up there, new sanctions or new publications. Thank you very much for your time and for your support. Together, I very much hope we can lift the corporate governance bar and ensure we continue to have a high-quality market here in Hong Kong.
Thank you, John. Now, we have a panel session looking at what is the impact of culture and diversity on governance standards, where our panelists will explore how organizations can implement real changes in corporate governance through company values and purpose, and the role that culture, integrity, and diversity play in building effective corporate governance. So first, I would like to introduce our moderator today, Ms. Catherine Ng, Head of Policy and Secretariat Services, Listing Division at HKEX. We are also joined by the following panelists: Ms. 𝗔𝗴𝗲, Legal and Governance Director of MTL Corporation Limited. Ms. May Tan, former Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered Bank Hong Kong and INED of Manulife and CLP Holdings. Dr. Christopher To, Chairman of the Hong Kong Institute of Directors, and Mr. Douglas Wu, BBS, JP, Chairman of Wheelock Group. We would like to make this session as interactive as possible, so please feel free to share your thoughts and questions with us through the Q&A tab at the right-hand side on your screen. So without further ado, let's start the panel discussion. Catherine, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We've heard lots of very useful information, starting with Bonnie, and we had Joe and Farrick sharing with us, practical experiences and what they see from their angle. I think that's much to be learned by our listed companies community in Hong Kong. And now we're very privileged to be joined by some very senior leaders in the Hong Kong business community today to talk about, more practical, how do they see this day-to-day issues. We've heard from Farrick, we've heard from Joe, what policies they should have, but these are the people who safeguard the policies and bring them to life, essentially. So we'll have a discussion and we'll try to be kind of as casual and kind of, I'll try to draw out from them, their experiences and how they make it work. Starting on my right, I think, I'd like to ask Jill the first question. She is a senior leader in MTR, mostly looking at legal and governance issues. I'd like her to share with us how corporate culture can help her company achieve its business goals and resilience. And are there any examples how MTR embeds these corporate culture and bring them to life? So Jill, please.
Thanks, Catherine. I think just to start by saying I think culture is an integral part of corporate governance. When you say corporate governance, people seem to think it's a very dry subject. It's about systems, processes, procedures, risk management and compliance frameworks. And of course, it's very important to get all of those hard controls right. But I think culture sits alongside those as an incredibly important soft control. And particularly in today's world where stakeholders expect companies not only to be legally compliant, but actually to do the right thing. And generally when laws and regulations are changing, you get a little bit of warning so you can adjust your systems and your processes to be prepared and make sure you don't fall foul. But public perceptions change much more quickly. So think about investments in defense companies before and after the Russia-Ukraine war. Think about tax avoidance schemes that once were seen as being a very wise way for companies to pay as little tax as possible, but perhaps are now seen as companies not doing their bit, not paying their fair share of taxes. And so I think if you have the right culture, it enables you to anticipate and respond to those changes in public perceptions, which can happen much more quickly. And if you look at recent corporate governance failings, it's often, I think, the culture that's actually fallen down. So you take Harvey Weinstein. I'm sure the Weinstein Company had an incredibly well-written anti-sexual harassment policy. You take Wells Fargo, where some of the salesmen were creating fake accounts. And again, I'm sure there were no problems with their policies and procedures, but their culture was such that that behavior was tolerated, and indeed maybe even incentivized through their remuneration mechanisms. The second thing I'd say, and I'll bring in some MTR experience here, is that when it comes to culture, there is no one-size-fits-all. So certain things, and John referred to earlier, a speak-up culture, I think is incredibly important and actually beneficial to all organizations. People feel comfortable to speak up when they sense wrongdoing or they're just not happy with what's going on. But I think from other aspects of culture, companies can need very different things. And so the really important thing is to ensure that your culture is aligned with your corporate purpose and your strategy. So for MTR, our corporate purpose is to keep Hong Kong moving. And so that means that for us, we need an incredibly compliant culture when it comes to safety and quality. But it also means we need a real can-do spirit amongst our staff. And you remember a few years ago during the protests when MTR stations were being attacked almost every day, and our staff were working 24/7 and working overnight to make sure that we could continue to run the railway that next day. And so I think for us, that alignment of our purpose with some of our real culture and our corporate values has added a huge amount of value to MTR. Thank you.
And then over to May. May used to sit on our listing committee, and she's worked in kind of many sectors. Mainly she used to be the CEO of Standard Chartered, and she now sits on boards locally, internationally, across many different industries. So I like to, such as CLP and Link REIT. So I like May to share with us, what are the common denominators between these boards? How do you make them successful? They're in vastly different industries, different jurisdictions. Are there any common themes that make it work?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to join this panel today. And having been on the listing committee and now on boards, this is a topic very close to my heart, and I totally agree with Jill on the subject of culture. It's something that is feely touchy, but it's so important. And coming back to your question about common denominator, I think first and foremost, having sat on both international boards and also Hong Kong listed boards, is sometimes in Asia, the tricky thing is there's lots of family-owned companies or government-owned companies. And we need to get that message across. It's not just the culture of the organization, it is the culture of the board, that there is good, deep respect for the independent directors, and they are empowered to disagree with the major shareholder, for instance. So I think first and foremost is the tone that is set. We keep talking about tone from the top, and that's definitely very important, and it's the tone from the major shareholder, from the chairman. He or she has to set the right tone by, first of all, I think the optics. Although the listing rules say that you have to have a third independent, why not go above a third? Show your shareholders that you are serious about some independent advice. And CLP has more than a third independent, for instance. And Ling REIT, where I just stepped off in February, we don't have a major shareholder, but 13 of the board directors, of which 2 are executive, and we have 11 independents on the board. So it is really important to have that tone from the top. The board has to be seen to be empowered. Secondly, it's not just the optics, but make sure that, say, the audit committee chair gets details of whistleblowing cases. The members of the employees have to know that the information is getting through to the board. They have to know, for instance, I sit on CLP's audit committee, and I get cases where health and safety issues are highlighted to me as an audit committee. And we try to make sure that, when we look at the KPIs of the management, that is being reflected at the end of the day in their remuneration. So it's not just setting KPIs, but making sure that the board is empowered to check on, first of all, are they the right KPIs to basically to inculcate that culture. You can't say, oh, I don't really care about the profitability, but you set a very high profit target. And then you say, oh, staff welfare is very important, but we want 90% increase in profitability. So the two things have to make sense in the first place. And I come back to the visibility point, that although the KPIs are set by the management, but visibility of the board is important. Make sure the board is engaged. John was talking about that. Go and attend strategy meetings. You don't need to talk, but just observe. Go to town halls so that the board is not just pictures in an annual report. They actually exist. The staff can actually talk to you. The customers can talk to you. So I think engagement is very important.
Thank you. And Chris, being the chairman of the Institute of Directors in Hong Kong, he obviously hears the view of a lot of directors, and this must be something that's close to the director's heart, and I imagine it's an issue or topic that's frequently discussed. Could you share with us what are the common kind of issues that the directors see, and how do you prepare your members? This is an area that's constantly changing. It started, like John said, more than 30 years ago, but the expectations, should we say, from investors are ever increasing, and best practice is always changing. How do you prepare and help train your members?
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for inviting me. I think most directors in Hong Kong say, well, not another regulation, not another procedure we have to go through. I think they have to understand this is not just better for their company, it's better for the whole world. And I think most of the directors in Hong Kong who come to the Hong Kong Institute of Directors say that we lack training. We don't know what to do. We don't have the manual. We don't have the resources. How do you implement this? So I think the Hong Kong EX Academy, at least, which you are involved with, Catherine, does a lot of work in terms of educating and by telling them what to do, how to implement policies, and so forth. So I think that's very important. Now, from the Hong Kong Institute of Directors' point of view, we do a lot of training courses. Some of you say, why are you doing those training courses? Not many people attend. The answer is we want to do these simply because we want to be seen as a leading city in Hong Kong to show to the world that all companies in Hong Kong do abide by not just the rules and regulations, but also the best practices going forward. And I totally agree with Jill and May. Culture plays a very important role in terms of setting the tone at the board. And I think if you set the right sort of tone, the chances are things will move ahead. So I think from a director's point of view, you have to engage. If you don't get engaged, the chances are you'll lose out and you will not become a top leader in the world.
It's very thoughtful, thank you. And then last but not least, Douglas. He's the chairman of a very famous company, WeLock in Hong Kong, a very different profile from MTRO and Standard Chartered and Link REIT and so on. Perhaps if you could share with us your journey, your company's journey on corporate governance, and what does kind of, is it difficult for you? Is it a case of, very often people think that you have to change the old way of doing things, and sometimes there's resistance. Do you see that to be the case, and how do you go about doing it?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been great listening and learning from all the experts in the room, and we are on a journey. And I think over this journey, we're thinking a lot about sustainability, what it means for the company many, many years down the road. Corporate governance, doing the right thing, doing things properly, and having the right mindset about things, and hopefully continuously improving from that. In our experiences working with the teams in a kind of collaborative way, it's been wonderful to see that there is a mindset there, and there is a want to do it in that way, and having accountability across all levels is actually well received. I think if we can continue to engender that and also engage on an inclusive way and provide that culture of listening and getting different types of feedback along the way, it actually propels us to continue on that journey. And one example we were speaking of beforehand is that we had recently delisted the company, and I think that without communication, it would be unsurprising that the teams would be expecting that the company will be running under an unlisted premise. However, the company was positioned, would want to be positioned to at least meet the 𝗙𝗲𝗄𝗏 standards, if not go beyond that. And with that communication, we were able to pull everyone together to go forward. So in that sense, there was an element of a communication positioning that the management had to specify. But at the same time, once that happens, the collective mindset and the momentum there was quite strong. So we really appreciated that, yeah.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next topic, we're going to talk about kind of diversity and how it fits into corporate governance. We've done quite a lot at the Hong Kong EX in terms of diversity. We've We are the first jurisdiction that requires every single company to have a diversity policy. It's mandatory, it's not optional. Every company must have it and must disclose it on an annual basis. We've ended kind of single gender boards. We started with IPO, so there's no IPO can come to Hong Kong if we look at the board and it's single gender, mostly male. We haven't seen an all-female board, it's mostly all-male board, and we are working on listed companies next. We've given listed companies 3 years to transition. And I was personally quite surprised when I looked at the data. We have 2,500 companies, and we have about 800 of them that are still single gender board, but we're getting there, you know. We want the companies to appoint the right directors. It cannot be a token female on the board. It needs to be a good fit. It needs to help the company. It needs to improve the conversation and the corporate governance of the company. So in 2.5 years' time, we should see a much better world in terms of the diversity of board directors on a listing company. But the journey, this is just the beginning. We're going to keep working on it and improving, and hopefully with awareness, things will kind of happen more automatically than for regulatory reasons. Now, Chris, could you please share some observation with us on how listed companies are embracing these changes, and what could we do to support the new requirement around diversity, whether it's kind of in terms of policy or ending to single gender board? I'm sure the Institute gets a lot of calls and asking, hey, where can I find, what should I do? Do you have any advice that you would give these listed issuers?
I think having a diverse board is very important, and I totally agree that we should have diverse, and so I totally support the Hong Kong HKEX in terms of what they're doing in terms of moving this forward. Before I came onto this seminar this morning, I went to your webpage. Usually I look at the webpage in terms of rules and listing regulations and all that stuff, but I did go into the academy to look at it, and I saw that, for example, you did have a list of 10 top companies who are very diverse in terms of their board, and it shows some sort of a status to them that basically these are best practices boards, which I find very useful. And there's lots of information there that you can actually see in terms of how you can engage boards in terms of moving into diversity. Now, from the Hong Kong Institute of Directors point of view, most boards find it difficult to engage if you want to use, for example, females and males as categories. They find it difficult to engage females because there's not many in the market. They try to find it, but I always believe that they're not doing their job properly. If they want to really do it, okay, there are many companies out there, including headhunters. The Hong Kong Institute of Directors does have, for example, a nomination service. So if you can actually engage them, the chances are you can get the right person. It's just a matter of your commitment and your dedication towards moving that. And I think the key thing is, if I may say so, from a very basic point of view, basic perspective, is I think education. I think most people don't understand why do we need to have a diverse board. They think we're operating okay now. We're doing things. We're generating enough profit for our company. Why bother? But I think you have to tell them, if you do that, the chance that your growth could be more than just being a local company, it could be an international company. So I think they have to be aware that they have to take the next level going forward with their board so that they can show the world that they are not just the best practices board, but also a board that has diverse sort of cultural backgrounds which can lead in terms of international business.
Well, it sounds like there is real kind of corporate governance benefits as well as a branding benefit. Now, Jill, MTR has recently published a target, a 25% female board members target by 2025. I was just wondering, I mean, this is quite a brave thing to do, and it's fair to say it's probably not that common amongst listed issuers. And you often hear that, why put pressure on myself? You know, we'll just do when you look at companies' diversity policies, it's often quite high level. We'll try, you know. And you've come out and put a 25% target. So congratulations, first of all. I wonder if you could share with us, you know, was it a hard sell to your board, to your management, or how did that come about? How did that miracle come about?
I hope we're one of the first, but not the only ones
yes.
to be setting these targets. I think, look, as you mentioned at the start, the exchange is doing some fantastic work in this space, but progress in Hong Kong has been pretty glacial. So we have 800 companies which have politely called single gender, but effectively all male boards, and we're still in the low teens of percents, lagging behind global best practice, but even around our competitors in Asia. And so this is an issue that I feel personally very strongly about. But it's also, I was lucky in some ways in that this is a really good fit with MTR's new ESG strategy. Because as a public transport operator, social inclusion is one of the 3 pillars of that strategy. And when we look at social inclusion, we look at universal basic mobility, we look at equal opportunities, but importantly at workforce D&I. And of course, setting the tone from the top with your board sends out a fantastic message to the workforce that you take this issue very seriously. And so for me, it was really a series of negotiations with my colleagues on the management team, with the chair of the nomination committee, who again, I was perhaps fortunate is female, and also ultimately with our board chair. And in each of those conversations, it was about a combination of selling the benefits of diversity. And I think now in Hong Kong, we've made pretty good progress in terms of people understanding that diverse teams tend to be more innovative, more creative, perhaps make better decisions or more challenged decisions. But I think also selling the benefits in terms of us being seen as an employer of choice. We know from talking to the younger generation, our graduates, that D&I is something they take very seriously. So if they can see that the board does, then that will help from an employment and a retention perspective. But it was also a question of busting the myths. And Chris talked about the myth that there aren't enough, and I hate this phrase, but people use it, there aren't enough board-ready females in Hong Kong. And the reason I hate it is because nobody ever questions whether or not a man is board-ready. And so I think it was about talking to them about organizations like the Women's Foundation, the 30% Club, the Women to Watch list that they keep, and really about trying to broaden their recruitment pools so they really were generating a level playing field. And I have to say, I was delighted that when we finally took this to our board, there was unanimous support for us setting this target. We're not quite as good as some of the boards that May sits on. We're about 20% at the moment. And so it was felt like giving us those 3 years to get to 25% was an achievable target. And I think it started actually to change some of the conversations at the board around succession planning. Our nomination committee, I think, is thinking a little bit further ahead of time and starting to think about potential female candidates so that we can meet our target. So it's, I'm delighted where we've got to, but a long way to go.
Well done. That's wonderful news. Douglas, you run a real estate business. You're in a real estate business where probably the vast majority of employees are male rather than female. And sometimes, you know, we hear from, I certainly hear from listed companies that, oh, it's impossible, you know, all the talents and all the senior managers are male. So it's particularly difficult for my industry to find a female to sit on the board or to find some senior female leaders or senior female management. Can you give me a waiver? So how do you feel about that? Do you think it's a valid excuse?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think in terms of diversity, you know, what benefits brings, and I think very much it brings decision-making, de-risking, innovation, creativity, which is really key to any company, right? And in that, I think we do come from a industry, like a majority of our companies are in that space, and it's traditionally male-dominated. And if we look at the sort of holistic kind of company, as it were, because I think diversity is important across all levels of the company, and we are happy to say that there's an amazing kind of situation where we're at 55-45 across the different companies, listed and unlisted. And we try to, you know, every so often, there are a couple of verticals where it's a little bit more female dominated. We'll be like, hey, look, you know, look at, you know, see if there's a gender balance there, and then things which are a little bit more male dominated, if there's a possibility of a bit more of a gender balance over there. On the kind of board levels across the other sides, I think, yeah, it takes time. Progress is being made, we can see. And then I think, the prominent one, as we were talking about, is gender, but there's also age, experience, education, ethnicity as well. And it's interesting, actually, just looking across some of the different boards. One board that we have has something which is called, we kind of frame it as a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a 40-some-year-old, 50-some-year-old, 60, 70, 80-some-year-old across the board, which is actually quite interesting because I think in times of unprecedented events, like what we've had over the last 2, 3, or 4 years, which is new, it's really a combination of different life experiences, industry experiences, work experiences, etc. And that just pulls in a much sort of more holistic 360 kind of view to help the company and help the team make better decisions going forwards.
That's great to know, thank you. May, you and I have had many conversations around diversity and how to improve the situation. We've talked quite a bit about, what companies should do, can do, targets to be set, and looking at different verticals and all that. I know you work on helping, for lack of a better word, kind of women be prepared for these challenges. And do you have any advice for companies or women? I mean, there'll be 800 companies that is having a woman sitting on their board for the first time. could be kind of for a long time or since inception. Do you have any advice for these companies or women that's going into this board? Because sometimes we hear women kind of being a bit shell-shocked when, and the other directors don't know quite to react.
Yes, thank you for that. And Catherine and I as she says, been talking about this subject for a long time. I'm a strong advocate, only because I think it makes sense for the business, because it's sustainable. You have 50% of men and women going to university, and then suddenly you find that you're losing a lot of talent along the way. It's just a waste of resources, and it's not sustainable. So although diversity comes in many shapes and forms, but gender is the most visible. That's point number one. Coming back to Catherine's question about, people getting shocked when they suddenly see a woman and they're not sure. And to be fair, the woman herself doesn't know whether she should speak or not speak, given that you've got 90% of the room being male. And I cast my own mind back to 9 years ago when I joined the Link Read board. I was the first woman to join the board. And I said to the chairman, I think we should have another woman too. So I know the exchange is advocating one, but you need to have more than one in the future for a conversation. You need to have more like-minded people in the room to support your idea. So, and after that, Elaine Young joined the board, and then what's happened is I joined the nomination committee, and I helped find another 2 women, and now we have 30%. So coming back to Jill's point about nomination committee, if you are a new board with a woman there, please include her in the nomination committee. That will only facilitate greater female representation in the future. Coming back to the point about not enough female talent, I don't buy that as well. And where I think companies can help is through setting targets, not at the board, but really at the workforce. If you say at Standard Chartered, we set ourselves targets, how many percent of your senior management should be female, and how do you arrive at that? This is not discrimination against the men, but it just focuses the mind of the managers that they have to train and develop the female talent. And over time, that female talent will fill the boards. You've got to start somewhere. You can't just suddenly, someone starts as a secretary and then, oh, you're female. Why don't you join the board? Because I need a woman on the board. You have to make sure the women over time are allowed to develop, allowed to sit in committee meetings in the companies, and then develop a sense of how to conduct themselves. And in fact, I've just started a non-profit training scheme for senior women to develop not the technical skills, but the softer skills. How do you communicate within the board? How do you interrupt the conversation? How do you put yourself across a tricky subject? How do you show leadership? So these are some of the softer skills that I think over time we will be able to develop within the female workforce.
Thank you. And we talk, I've had to look at the questions. There's a lot of very interesting ones coming in. But one of them, the question that I'm going to talk about kind of relates to this. We talked about corporate governance, we talked about diversity. We do that because we want there to be a lively discussion in the boardroom. We want check and balances. We want INEDs to voice their views, and we want different perspective. So assuming that we have a diverse board, one question that is raised is, how about INEDs? INEDs, we have some very senior INEDs amongst us today, but how do they are very shy. There are a lot of companies where the INEDs are perhaps find it difficult to find a voice on the board. They might have a diverse board, they might have a view, but they are not quite sure how to, I wouldn't say contradict, but give constructive comments on the board. Do you have any tips that you could give them? Who would like to start? Maybe Chris?
I think the quickest way is the chairman of the board, because the chairman or the chairperson of the board sets the direction. So I think the chairperson does have a duty to actually engage the independent directors. And maybe this person, he or she, is usually quantified because it's he or she. I think he or she basically will have to sit down with this person and say, okay, we want you involved, okay? Which areas would you like to get involved with? Now, if you have something to say before the meetings, you get the meetings agenda and so forth, by all means, flag it to me. Tell me beforehand. So I'll give you a cue so that whenever a meeting is progressing, for you to speak up. So I think that's how you engage them. Once they feel more comfortable, as May said, they haven't got the soft skills, they don't know what to say, this all male-dominated board, the chances are they'll feel more comfortable. They know what to say. So I think the leadership, as your colleague in the exchange said, the culture is very important. So the chairman of the board should be the leader of this sort of movement going forward, I believe.
So 2 points from me. I think first of all, the orientation, the board orientation program is really important, making sure that the new director knows the company well, spends time with the management. And so when they do interrupt or say something, it is with substance. Because the last thing you want is to have a token female there talking rubbish because she has not done her homework. And I don't think that's going to be the case. But you do need to put in the time. And women or men are there for a special skills. That's how boards are being formed. And there will be the cue, when it's something legal and you're a lawyer background, people automatically look at you and say, what do you think, Jill? What's the legal implications? May, you're a banker, let's look at the financial status of this company. So there will be value add, don't worry.
Great. And then another question from the audience. We heard about, policies, culture being toned from the top and all that. How do you, maybe Jill, and Douglas afterwards, how do you make sure that, when the board discusses a culture, it implements it at the very senior management level? How does the frontline staff, in your case, feel the company's culture?
Interesting, isn't it? We carried out late last year an employee engagement survey, which was a great way for the management team to do a check-in on what was going on with our employees, concerns they may have. It's been a tough few years. And so we've spent quite a bit of time reporting the results of that back up to our board and having a detailed conversation with them about the challenges that were raised, the concerns that were raised. And so then we've tried to sort of reverse that feedback process so that the feedback from the board has then been fed back into our action plans that we're putting in place as a result of the survey. But I think it is a challenge for INEDs, and May talked earlier about the importance of INEDs getting stuck in, going to town halls or strategy meetings to really actually get to know people within the business. And I think probably that's the most critical thing is building some of those relationships so that the INEDs really get a direct eye into actually what's going on, the smell of the place, as John called it.
Douglas,
I suppose I think from an INED point of view, I think it's trying to figure out different ways to get the smell of the place, engage with who you can engage with in the company, no matter sort of where the person sits. It could be different areas of the business as well, and try to understand as much as possible and become sort of engaged with it to be able to give that kind of feedback. And I think that's very helpful for not only the INED, but also for the company as a whole. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful. We just have a couple of minutes left now, so it's been a really wonderful conversation, and I've learned a lot, especially from a practical perspective, how to bring difficult subjects like corporate governance, diversity, controls, INEDs into life. So thank you, each of you, very much. Perhaps before we go, if I could ask each of you just to share, any must-do things, the one thing that you would advise our listed issuers kind of go back and make sure they have or they'll do. Maybe each of you just share one valuable tip for our audience today.
Sure, so if I could maybe give a bit of a plug to the role of company secretaries in good corporate governance, because I think we play a unique role really as sitting almost between the board and the management team. And so I think, particularly with the changes to the rules, use this as an opportunity as HKEX to put these changes on the board agenda and to sort of nudge some of these issues along in the board discussions. So I think please, remember you've got a really important role you can play.
For me, it's the keep an open mind. I think that's one of the most important changes in the culture of an organization, not just from the INED's perspective, but chairman, CEO, all the way down. People need to keep an open mind about, how they run the business and how they communicate.
I think getting engaged and also do CPD, continuing professional development, is very important so that you know exactly what you have to do when you need to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think one takeaway would be, personally, I think it's just to engage and to really think about it. Often there were a lot of questions, and actually I was very happy to be here today, and over the course of the different talks, there were like glimmers of each that you're going to pull away with, and we were just mentioning the smell of the place, for instance, right? So I think all these are very, very helpful.
Thank you. So this talked about keeping an open mind, the role of company secretaries, and training. So I think it's a learning process for everybody. You learn with experience, but we have a lot of materials available on our Hong Kong EX website. There's the ESG Academy, there's videos, I think Hong Kong X guidance has different guidance for different topics and different kind of roles. So if you're directors, there are specific materials that's targeted for directors. If you have to prepare ESG report or if you have to prepare CG report, there are materials over there. So there's no lack of information out there. So I'll encourage anybody listening today, if they want to learn more about corporate governance, if they want to learn more about corruption, diversity, ESG, there's plenty available on the Hong Kong EX website. So thank you all for joining us today, and see you at the next ESG Academy.
Thank you all for that insightful discussion. We are now at the end of today's webinar. Once again, we would like to thank all our guest speakers and participants for joining this event. HKEX is dedicated to lifting the corporate governance bar and ensuring a high quality of markets here in Hong Kong. We hope today's discussion has given you some insights on how a well-defined corporate governance looks like and encourages you to embed these principles and practices in your businesses. We look forward to seeing you at the next ESG Academy webinar. Thank you and have a good afternoon.